She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there at the back of my wedding, holding something in her hand. And when our eyes met, my whole body went cold. I didn't know her, but somehow, she knew everything about me. And that was only the beginning. If you've ever felt like your whole life was built on a story someone else wrote for you, this one is for you. Stay with me all the way through because what happens at the end of this wedding is something I could never have prepared for, and neither will you. If stories like this hit you somewhere deep, subscribe right now and hit that bell. Now let me take you back to the day my entire life changed, in the middle of my own wedding. My name is Michael, and for 34 years, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a house where everything looked perfect from the outside. My adoptive parents, Walter and Patricia, gave me every material thing a child could want. Private school, a car at 16, medical school paid in full. They weren't cruel people, they were just distant. The kind of parents who showed up to every recital but never quite made you feel seen. I always knew I was adopted. Walter told me when I was 7 the same way he delivered most things, cleanly, factually, with no room for follow-up questions. He said my birth mother was a young woman who couldn't care for me, that she made the loving choice. I nodded, folded the information somewhere deep, and got on with becoming the person they were building me to be. I became a surgeon. I built a clean, structured life. And somewhere along the way, I stopped looking back because the life in front of me was demanding enough to fill every corner. Then I met Nicole. She was warm in a way that used to make me uncomfortable because I wasn't used to it. She asked real questions and actually waited for the answers. Over 3 years, she slowly helped me become someone who felt things instead of just observing them from a careful distance. When I proposed, she cried, and for the first time in my adult life, so did I. We planned the wedding for nearly a year, a historic chapel in Virginia, 200 guests, every detail exactly right. But 1 week before the wedding, I noticed something off about Walter. A phone call he took outside, away from the rehearsal dinner. The look on his face when he came back? Not guilty exactly, more like a man who had just been reminded of something he'd worked very hard to forget. I asked if everything was okay. He patted my shoulder the way he always did when a conversation was over, and I let it go, the way I always did. I had built my whole identity on a story someone else wrote for me. I just didn't know it yet. The morning of the wedding was perfect. Golden light through the hotel window, Nicole's laughter down the hall, my best friend telling a terrible joke while helping me with my tie. Everything felt light and right and exactly as it should be. The chapel was beautiful. Cool air, old wood, fresh flowers, soft organ music. Nicole's grandmother was already pressing a tissue to her eyes in the front row. 200 people filled those pews, all carrying that warm collective energy that only shows up when everyone genuinely wants two people to be happy. I stood at the altar and felt steady, more like myself than I ever had. When Nicole appeared at the back of that chapel, every thought I had went quiet. The ceremony moved slowly and beautifully. Pastor Green had a voice made for exactly this kind of moment. Deep and unhurried, like he understood that some words deserve space around them. We were halfway through the vows when I glanced toward the back of the chapel. I don't know why. There was nothing pulling me there consciously, but I did, and that's when I saw her. She was standing near the rear doors, slightly apart from the last row of guests, like she wasn't quite committing to being inside. A black woman, somewhere in her late 50s, wearing a dark navy dress. Not seated, not holding a program, just standing completely still, watching me with an expression I still struggle to fully describe. The closest I can get is this. She looked like someone watching a house they used to live in burn down slowly from across the street, unable to do anything about it, not panicked, just carrying something enormous quietly. Our eyes met, my chest tightened, my hands perfectly still all morning started to tremble. Something old and deep inside me responded to her face before I had any conscious reason to. I pulled my eyes back to Nicole and finished my vows, but in my peripheral vision I caught Walter. Face gone the color of old paper, gripping the pew with one hand while his brother Roy held his arm firm and deliberate, jaw tight, staring straight ahead like a man trying very hard not to look at something specific. I said I do. The ring went on, the chapel filled with applause. I kissed my wife and walked back down that aisle smiling, but my hands didn't stop shaking for a long time after that. The reception was held in the garden behind the chapel. White linen, candles, warm Virginia evening air. Nicole moved through it, all glowing, and I loved her so much it almost hurt. But I kept looking for the woman. I spotted her 20 minutes in, sitting on a low stone bench near the garden entrance. Outside the celebration, alone, hands folded in her lap. A small brown envelope beside her on the bench. Nicole touched my arm and asked if I was okay. I told her it was just nerves settling. She believed me, and that trust made the weight in my chest heavier, not lighter. I walked across that garden slowly, the way you approach something when part of you already knows it's going to change you. She saw me coming and stood, not urgently, deliberately, like someone who had been rehearsing this moment for a very long time. When I reached her, she looked at me for a quiet second and said, in a voice that was remarkably calm, "I am not here to ruin your day. I am here because you deserve to know the truth before another year passes." She held out the envelope. My hands took it before my brain decided to. Inside were three things: a birth certificate, a small hospital photograph, old and faded, and a folded letter. I looked at the birth certificate first. The name on it was not the name Walter and Patricia had given me. My original name, written next to a birth date that was mine. And in the space marked Mother, a name I had never heard before that evening, Dr. Renee Coleman. I looked up at her. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She just stood there, open and steady, giving me all the space I needed to arrive at what I was already arriving at. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped everything. Because the woman standing in front of me, calm, dignified, alone, wasn't a stranger at all. She was my mother. I don't remember walking back inside. I just remember being in a small side room with Walter across from me and the door closed, and that envelope in my hand like the only solid thing in the world. I didn't yell. I held up the birth certificate, looked at him, and said very quietly, "Tell me everything, right now." And Walter, the man who had never once shown emotional vulnerability in my memory, sat down and put his face in his hands and wept. The first time I had ever seen him cry, and it broke something open in me I'm still not sure has fully closed. The story came out in pieces. 35 years ago, Walter and Renee had a brief relationship. Before he married Patricia, but after he had already proposed to her. Renee was 22 in medical school, building something real with her life. She became pregnant. Walter panicked. Patricia came from a prominent Virginia family. Old name, old expectations, old money. A pregnancy with another woman would have, in Walter's words, destroyed everything. As if the everything that mattered was already assembled, and Renee and that child were the threat to it. He paid for her care during the pregnancy, framing it as responsibility. After I was born, he had a private attorney, found through Roy, draw up adoption papers. Renee was told she was signing documents related to custody and financial support. She was 22, exhausted, newly postpartum, and trusting of the process because she had no reason yet to know it could be used against her. What she actually signed was a full and permanent termination of her parental rights. By the time she understood what had happened, I was gone. She spent years trying to find me. Attorneys, petitions, every legal channel available. Every door closed. Walter had money and connections and had used both precisely to make sure she could never reach what was hers. Roy had helped him do it. Roy, who slipped me extra money at every birthday and told jokes at every Christmas, had known the entire time and said nothing. My father had stolen me, not out of cruelty, out of cowardice. He had looked at the life he'd assembled and decided it was worth more than the woman he had wronged. He dressed it up in words like stability and loving choice for 34 years, and he had believed his own story so thoroughly that he had almost made it true. Somehow that was worse than if he had simply been a monster. Monsters are easy to walk away from. Cowards who loved you in their own limited way are something else entirely. I went back to the garden and sat down beside Renee while the reception wound down around us. She told me her story plainly, the way someone tells it when they've had decades to hold it and decide the truth doesn't need decoration. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo album, worn at the edges from years of handling. The first page was the hospital photograph, the original. Me, hours old, eyes pressed shut in that particular newborn way that makes every baby look ancient and brand new at the same time. She had one photograph of me as a baby. Just one. The rest of the album was newspaper clippings. Honor rolls. A blurry photograph from a hospital fundraiser where I was visible in the background. She had circled me in pencil. An article about a young surgeon recognized for community work. She had been finding me in fragments from a distance for years, piecing together my life from the edges of public record because every path to the center had been cut off. Then she handed me the birthday cards, 34 of them, one for every year of my life. Sealed and never sent, banded together with a rubber band that had left an impression in the paper from years of pressure. She had written one every year on my birthday. She had no address to send them to. She wrote them anyway. I opened one from when I was 12. Her handwriting was neat and careful. She wrote that she hoped I was learning things I loved, that she hoped someone was making me laugh, that she thought about me every single day and she was sorry she couldn't be there. Every single card ended the same way, the same two sentences, whether I was turning 5 or turning 30. I love you. I'm still here. I broke down then. Not polite, controlled emotion, the deep structural kind that happens when something you didn't know was broken inside you finally gives way. I sat on that bench at my own wedding reception and cried for everything she had lost, for the 22-year-old woman who signed a paper she didn't understand, for every birthday she spent alone writing to an address she didn't have. She put her hand over mine and didn't say a word. She just stayed. Nicole came to find me a few minutes later. She took in the scene, my face, the cards, the album, without a single question. She looked at Renee and said simply, "Please don't go." Renee looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. The three of us sat together in that garden while the candles burned low and nothing was neat or resolved, but it was the most honest moment of my entire life. Everything didn't heal overnight. Building a relationship with Renee was slow and careful, and sometimes painful in the way real things are. But we took it one conversation at a time, and every conversation added something back that had been missing without me even knowing it was gone. With Walter, I chose honesty over distance for the first time in our relationship. He apologized to Renee. Roy apologized too, messier and louder, and with more tears than Walter. Renee listened to both of them and accepted it and moved forward. She always moved forward. She doesn't carry bitterness. She carries birthday cards. Karma doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like a woman in a navy dress walking quietly into a chapel and waiting, patient and unhurried, for the truth to finally refuse to stay buried. She stood silent at my wedding because the world had spent 34 years telling her that her voice didn't matter, that her grief wasn't worth space, that the paper she signed at 22 was the final word on what she was allowed to feel. But it wasn't the final word. I am the final word. And every day I spend making sure she knows that her voice matters is a day I feel more whole than the one before. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else who needs it find it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.